Right. What an easy act for you to follow. Cross the Rubicon, you're up next.
Hello, the people of Auckland. Well, that's going to be a hard act to follow. Well, here we are, the white supremacists of New Zealand, according to Patrick Gower and the lying New Zealand mainstream media. We know what they'll write before they sit at their computer screens. The far right gather in Albert Park to spread their hate. How can the mainstream media be so dishonest to brand people, good people, who have real concerns about the direction this government is taking this country? And some journalists, Patrick Gower, go on a crusade on government orders to tarnish the reputations of good, honest people by calling them white supremacists. What has happened to this country? But rest assured, the people of New Zealand, and indeed the Western world, are waking up from their apathy and their lethargy. They're coming to realise the mainstream media isn't there to check the government anymore, but instead work in tandem as their propaganda machine to deliver fake news and manipulate the masses. The government is doing what the United Nations and globalists tell them to do. And in turn, the mainstream media will do and print what the government tell them to do. The United Nations and the shadowy globalist billionaires like George Soros are in the process of destroying our democracies. The whole of the Western world is near tipping point. The people of these nations realise it, but their leaders press on with the insanity of the managed decline of their own nations.
True.
How do we get to this point where truth becomes lies and lies become truth? When did it become wrong to be right? Governments of the Western democracies were elected by their people only to abandon the people and the promises that they made once they gained power. These governments, this New Zealand government, now serve the United Nations, and we the people are being ignored. Worse still, they are trying to make us criminals for telling the truth. We are being lied to on an unprecedented and monumental scale. Our institutions have been taken over by common purpose cultural Marxists who are using their power and influence to push through their agenda of self-loathing in ourselves for what our ancestors did or didn't do hundreds of years ago. Well, I'm sick of being made to feel guilty for something I never did, you never did. I'm sick of the narrative being pushed by these Marxists that have no right and I have no voice because I'm apparently privileged. Do you feel privileged?
No.
My voice means nothing now due to my privilege, our privilege. Only oppressed minorities that have been selected by these cultural Marxists in the mainstream media and the corridors of power have voices and hold the monopoly of the so-called truth. We are living in the age of universal deceit, where telling the truth is fast becoming a revolutionary act of defiance. The self-loathing in ourselves for what our once great nations did or didn't do is destroying us from within. Political correctness is also used to take away our voices and making us fear telling the truth and what needs to be said, regardless of who it offends. Political correctness is the language of cowards. It is the emasculation of men, and the emasculation of men makes for a weaker and more vulnerable nation.
True.
What What they love to call toxic masculinity is the dehumanising of the stand-up man in favour of the man who's fearful of offending anyone. This weak and feeble male is celebrated by the left, while any man who doesn't suffer this insanity is shunned and ostracised and blamed. The government and the mainstream media play the biggest part in this cultural erosion and this decline. Just take a look at our politicians, our journalists. Very few have any hint of stand-up, honest, straight-talking, no-nonsense man. Our governments, our media, our decision-makers are lily-livered weaklings. We are being weakened on purpose. The fight or the fighter is being bred out of us for a reason. This government and the mainstream media work hand in hand to slowly brainwash their nations into believing that them who want to preserve their countries and their nations are racist, bigots, xenophobes, Islamophobes, and must be demonised, dehumanised and destroyed. The narrative of Western nations, governments, mainstream media and academia is to promote mass migration from the third world into the first world as a positive thing that we all should support and even celebrate. Diversity is our strength, they keep telling us, but we know it's not true. And anyone who's against the demographic and cultural genocide is to be demonised and ruined by the government and their sycophantic journalists in the mainstream media. Patrick Gower. The New Zealand police are quickly becoming tools of the state to intimidate good, honest people in their own homes for their wrong-think political opinions. This includes myself being visited twice by fully armed police in Christchurch to ask me if I was a Trump supporter. I did. This government is on a crusade to criminalise concerned citizens to know what the result of the policies do to a nation. These informed people, that's you, know what's happening in the UK and Western Europe, Canada, and now even in Australia. And you don't want it to come here because you know the consequences. The only way this government can achieve what they're doing is to criminalise our freedoms of speech, making our concerns a crime of hate. Since the Christchurch mosque attack, this government has gone into overdrive, desperate to criminalise New Zealanders who love their country and want to preserve it. They're taking away our freedoms and they're in the process of disarming New Zealanders. Don't think for 1 minute they'll stop at semi-automatic weapons. They will come for all guns of any kind. This is all part of the United Nations plan to disarm the populations so they can't defend themselves against the tyranny of government.
Venezuela.
Mass migration into a nation, along with the United Nations compliant Marxist government, is much easier to achieve when the population has been disarmed and brainwashed into thinking they now live in a safer country. This is nothing short of treachery by them we elected. And at the very same time, they are promoting one particular religion above all others. This government is surreptitiously introducing blasphemy laws where one particular religion, Islam, cannot be criticised. Nearly every day now we see some representative from this religion either on our TV screens or on our national radio stations telling us that Islamophobia must be stopped and must be criminalised by this government. And this government and this media and academia kowtowing to this demand like the cowards they are. They are gutless and lying quislings bent on appeasing a religious culture that they know threaten violence and death to them that criticise that religion. But these cowards in our parliament want to bring more. Instead of challenging these demands, they attack the easy option. And that's the people who are willing to tell the truth at great risk to themselves. And that's us. The risk is violent attack by jihadists or Marxists, and even arrest and imprisonment by this government. The truth is anathema to these traitors who hold power over us. The truth is the truth and should not be shut down in the name of tolerance. In this case, tolerance is suicide of this nation of only 5 million people. Not any group, person, religion or anything else should have the right not to be criticised or offended. This is our freedom this government wants to take away. There's only one particular group who's demanding not to be offended, and not only here in New Zealand but right across the Western world. And near all Western governments are capitulating to their demands. Why are they doing this?
Yep.
Why are the world leaders like rabbits in the headlights when it comes to this issue? What are they afraid of? Do these same leaders know nothing of history? How can they be so educated and be so stupid all at the same time? Why do they refuse to acknowledge the truth when it's staring them in the face? Instead, they attack their own, that's us, to signal their virtue. In Britain and Europe, and especially France, they are on the cusp of civil unrest, even civil war, due to this very same ideology flooding into their nations. And it's the same with the politicians and the mainstream media and academia refusing to face the problems and instead focusing on the secondary issue of the rise of nationalism and populism in Europe. And populism is a reaction to their inaction and collective cowardice. What makes these people so willingly blind, ignorant and cowardly? And New Zealand is going down the exact same path of importing in an alien culture that refuses to integrate and instead insists that we bend to them.
That's telling.
There's no doubt that this is being driven by the heavily corrupted United Nations to change all Western nations into what they quixotically believe a utopia of their making. But we know the opposite is true. This migration of the third world to the first world is going to turn the Western democracies into a dystopian nightmare. Enter the United Nations Global Compact on safe and orderly and regular migration. This has been drawn up by the United Nations along with traitorous leaders from Western nations, including the traitorous Angela Merkel, the traitorous Macron of France, and the traitor of Canada, Trudeau. And most countries have signed it without the knowledge of their own people. The rise in populism in Europe and the UK, voting for Brexit and the election of Donald Trump has thrown a spanner in the works for these globalist destroyers of nations. But now they're speeding the process up, rushing to fill their nations with third world, mostly alien religions and barbaric cultures to change the demographics and the voting patterns. of their nations. They are importing voters to keep power by any means. The right wing or right of centre governments will never achieve power ever again. The United Nations Compact instructs governments to control the narrative via the media, fund media that promote the compact, and defund them media who are against the compact. So there goes our freedom of the press. Journalists will be re-educated to promote the compact. So any journalist who's against it will no doubt be unemployed and blacked from earning a living in any country that has signed up to this disaster. Winston Peters tells us it's not binding, and so does the so-called right of centre ACT Party leader David Seymour. But they know perfectly well it will become binding. Both of these men are charlatans who masquerade as right-wing politicians, but they've been exposed as liars and controlled opposition. How many New Zealanders even know about the compact? Yes, hardly anyone you talk to. We're here today because we know of the compact, because we've took the time to know. Have you ever wondered why not one single journalist in New Zealand has questioned the compact? Why? Why the silence? This government has handed over sovereignty of New Zealand's borders to the United Nations, and not one media outlet questions it. Is it fear? Is it naivety? Stupidity? Insanity? Or are they all just simply bought in to this being the right path for New Zealand? Do they think what's happening in the UK and Europe is lies being driven by far-right extremists? Do they think the Islamic terrorism, Sharia street patrols, female genital mutilation, honour killings, rape gangs, Sharia law, child marriage, murders of them who criticise that religion, and the state protection of their rights over the indigenous population? Do the media in this country think that's all lies? Gone are the days of Voltaire, when he said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." We are on the fast track now to losing our freedoms. How long until what we're doing right now becomes a crime? What I'm saying now will be a jailable offence. Even you listening to me on this podium will become a crime. I have no doubt right now we're being watched on orders somewhere out there, on orders from this Marxist government who want to shut down all criticism of them and what they are doing to this country and make it a crime against this nation. From next year, we will be inundated with third world migrants who this government have signed to feed, to clothe, give welfare, house, provide interpreters, provide for their cultural needs, school, give absolute preference to in everything they need. And who's going to pay for all this? Yes, it's going to be us, the taxpayer. Were we asked if this was a good idea? No, we were not, because these liars who rule over us know what the answer would have been. They insist that we are spreading misinformation about the compact and it's non-binding. Why would any government sign something that's non-binding? We are being deceived. Our towns and cities will change beyond all recognition, and the government and the mainstream media will pander to their every whim no matter what devastating effects will happen in our communities. Like they have in the UK and Europe, they will infiltrate our institutions, our politics, our police, academia, media, and even our military. The race card and the ultra-oppress card will be played to great effect to achieve their goals, and our rights to complain will be gone. The brave souls who do complain will get the visit from the thought police, sending out the chilling effect to the masses to keep your mouths shut or else. Jacinda is a disaster for this country, but the media is fully bought in and paid for, and the political opposition is just controlled opposition pretending to be an alternative. Jacinda doesn't represent the people of this country but the United Nations. She answers to them, not us. I have no doubt she's already lined up to take a cushy, highly paid job at the United Nations HQ in New York once she has successfully destroyed this country. Turning New Zealand from a great little nation in the South Pacific to a third world shithole will be considered a success to Jacinda and her globalist paymasters. With the only opposition in New Zealand being controlled opposition, what comes after Jacinda will be much the same. We need change now. What's needed in this country now is real opposition who will challenge the status quo of the same old, same old. Yes. A brave new party that are drawn from the people who clearly see what the current crop of career politicians refuse to see or are too cowardly to see. They have to go. Their days are numbered, or else this country is doomed to the same fate as the United Kingdom, Sweden, Germany, Belgium and France. What we have now are liars and deceivers and prevaricators. But we still vote for them because there's no alternative. We vote for the least worst option. You can't put a cigarette paper between any of them. What we have now is in our parliament are hamstrung with political correctness, desperate to please, and especially minority and super oppressed groups. They are mealy-mouthed cowards desperate to signal their virtue, but are devoid of real virtue, honesty, integrity, or morality.
True.
This being the same of their lackeys in the mainstream media. Patrick Gower. When this new party emerges, the government and the mainstream media will go after them, digging deep to find fault and use ad hominem attacks to discredit them. Racists, bigots, misogynists, far-right, xenophobic, Islamophobic, homophobic, transgenderophobic will be the buzzwords they'll use ad nauseum. But the leader and the leaders of this party will have to rise above it and stick to the truth and the facts of what is happening in this country and the rest of the world. And the truth is that this country, this tiny nation of 5 million people, is on the precipice of disaster. If we don't make that change, the United Nations can take a running jump, is what I'd advise to that leader of this new party that's going to come. New Zealand is for New Zealanders, and we control who comes into this country. We'll control the numbers and the skills needed at any one time.
Absolutely.
And no corrupt organisation on the other side of the world will tell us otherwise. New Zealand will be run by a New Zealand government who are elected of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Yeah.
Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. And this is the age of the weak man right now. And we've got to change it. Thank you.
Thank you.